Hello, Patriots. It's Lisa Logan again. I hope you are ready for Sinister SEL Part 2 because last time in Sinister SEL Part 1, we talked a little bit about what SEL was, who's behind it, why they wanted to federalize the education system so they didn't be able to nationalize curriculum and assessments, not just for cognitive and academic skills, but also for social emotional skills. And today we're going to talk about Common Core. And Common Core was one of the biggest ways that SEL started showing up in all of our academic subjects. And we're also going to talk today about, before it was kind of mentioned that the National Governors Association was the people involved in pushing Common Core, but that wasn't the case. You'll see in the presentation today, it wasn't just the National Governors Association. So enjoy. Here's part 2.
In the previous video, we talked about the roots of social-emotional learning and the bills that were signed into law which nationalized curriculum and restructured public schools. With those laws and initiatives like outcomes-based education, training for global citizenship was established as the primary purpose of all education. You can't really talk about social-emotional learning without talking about Common Core, because that was the vehicle that inched social-emotional learning into every subject in school curriculum. The Common Core State Standards Initiative, which produced K-12 standards that were released in 2010, were adopted by most states in an effort to qualify for federal race-to-the-top funding. Despite promises by proponents that Common Core would be academic and rigorous, documentation from USDE and many national stakeholder groups, including CASEL, demonstrates that a number of the standards would be used not for academic advancement, but for psychological training of children starting at a young age. SEL and Common Core are closely and intentionally intertwined, with various elements of SEL found in nearly every state's K-12 standards framework and in the Common Core state standards. For instance, including non-cognitive factors such as grit and persistence as measurable competencies for Common Core state standards for math. This is not unlike the ESSER III or American Rescue Plan funds and stimulus packages of today. Accepting these federal funds often come with strings attached or hoops you have to jump through. ESSER III funds come with the promise that schools need to utilize at least 20% of their funds toward learning loss, including social-emotional learning. So you may ask yourself, where did Common Core come from? It is claimed that Common Core was launched in 2009 by state leaders through their membership in the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices, or NGA Center, and the Council of Chief State School Officers, or CCSSO. In reality, Common Core and the bills that preceded it are all products of the United Nations in an effort to internationalize our education system. In 2004, Microsoft, or Bill Gates, contracts with UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, to fulfill part of UNESCO's Millennium Campaign goals: universal education and educating for a global economy. A master curriculum for teacher training in information technologies-based standards, guidelines, benchmarks, and assessment techniques is to be developed. In 2005, Bill Gates funds the new Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce, created by Tucker. States begin adopting its education reform initiative, Tough Choices or Tough Times. In 2008, Utah's Governor Huntsman touts it and joins with 5 other states, Massachusetts, Delaware, Arizona, New Mexico, and New Hampshire, who adopt it in order to, quote, reinvent their educational systems. In 2008, the Gates Foundation, along with 2 other foundations, created Strong American Schools, a successor to the Stand Up campaign launched in 2006, which was an outgrowth of UNESCO's Millennium Campaign goals for universal education. It calls for American education standards. In 2008, the Gates Foundation funds the International Benchmarking Advisory Group report for Common Core standards on behalf of the National Governors Association, Council of Chief State School Officers, and Achieve, Inc., titled Benchmarking for Success, Ensuring U.S. Students Receive a World-Class Education. This report shows the United Nations is a member of the International Benchmarking Advisory Group for Common Core Standards. The member of mention is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, which developed UNESCO's Millennium, later the Incheon Declaration, partnering with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In 2009, Mark Tucker, who we learned about in that last video and who wrote the Dear Hillary letter, wrote a chapter in the book Change Wars, The Inspiring Future for Educational Change. One chapter was called The International Benchmarking as a Lever for Policy Reform. The book mentions the UN's OECD-launched Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, in 2000 as a way to monitor the outcomes of education. Linda Darling-Hammond also contributes a chapter. Darling-Hammond heads the SBAC, or the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, which, quote, supports the development and implementation of learning and assessment systems to radically reshape the education enterprise in participating states in order to improve student outcomes. In April 2009, Gates Foundation members, along with a few dozen others, participate in a Washington conference and produce Smart Options, investing the recovery funds for student success. These ideas were funded by the 2008 Stimulus, or ARRA, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and supported Race to the Top. Priority 1 was to develop Common American Standards, also called Career Ready Standards, in most states by January 2012. In the summer of 2009, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Governors Association, and Achieving agreed to partner on a Common Core Standards project. Well, finally, we see the governors. But you can see now that UN entities were heavily involved in implementing Common Core. You may be asking yourself, who is UNESCO, and why is the UN so interested in education in the United States? UNESCO, which you see at the top there, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, wants to see its 2030 Sustainable Development Goals through to completion, specifically SDG 4, Quality and Inclusive Education for All. While UNESCO claims its role is promoting world peace and security through international cooperation in education, the sciences, and culture, they are also one of the prime supporters of comprehensive sexuality education for children, which many of you know is far more comprehensive than any of us would really want, and they partner with the International Planned Parenthood Federation there on the right. One of their stated main goals is globalized citizenship education, or GCED. According to UNESCO, globalized citizenship education aims to empower learners of all ages to assume active roles, both locally and globally, in building more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, and secure societies. Again, that sounds really nice, right? A great deal depends, though, on who is defining terms like these and how they are to be measured. In her book, The Invincible Family, Kimberly Ells warns, equitable and inclusive are elastic terms, open to a wide range of interpretations. If deference to equity or equality is required, then young people who embrace the concept of free market systems wherein inequalities are allowed may be tagged as harboring attitudes that are unacceptably inequitable and targeted for re-education. If inclusiveness is applied to matters of sex, then holding specific beliefs about sexual conduct may be assessed as non-inclusive and therefore undesirable. In fact, inclusivity is commonly used to express acceptance of sexual variance. Globalized citizenship education wants to get children all over the world to think in a very specific, hive-mind way about certain topics, valuing socialism over capitalism, accepting that gender is fluid, and that climate change is real. The goal is to activate students to be agents for change for social and racial justice issues, LGBTQIA+ rights, and environmentalism. These attitudes and objectives may or may not line up with your familial and religious cultural beliefs. The question is, should this way of thinking that lines up with UN political objectives be taught in government schools as the standard, which then usurps our parental rights to raise our children with the values, attitudes, and beliefs that we want them to have? We just covered how Common Core nationalized standards for cognitive abilities and how they are nationalizing standards for what students should and shouldn't believe through SEL. If you haven't figured it out already, this is a very dangerous trajectory. In the next video, we'll talk about how the problem of who defines what plays out when it comes to the SEL standard bearer organization CASEL and what their goal of social emotional learning is.
Join me next time as we talk about CASEL and why a little change they made in 2020 made a huge difference. Don't forget to like this video, to subscribe to the channel, and click that little bell so next time I post content, you'll know when it comes out. Thank you so much for your support.